Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Ryan McGuigan, and welcome back to the Renewed Life podcast. Joining me today is Casey McGuire Davidson. Casey is an ex-red wine girl, so she has a lot in common with me. Turned life and sobriety coach, and she's the host of the Hello Someday podcast. If it looks like I'm fighting off two puppy dogs, I am. An inspirational podcast with almost 200 episodes, where she shares tips and tools on how to live a life you love. To date, she has had over 1 million downloads of her podcast. That is pretty amazing. Today, she shares her story, her struggles, and how she found success and happiness, and uses her message to be a voice of hope for those suffering or using alcohol as a crutch. Through her transformative courses and coaching programs, she empowers women all over to love the life they live and live it free from the grips of alcohol. And welcome, Casey.
Oh, thank you.
And we have some inside baseball. We had a little conversation before we started, and Casey and I have a lot in common. We both went to boarding school in the New England area and know some of the same people, and so we have certainly a connection already. However, we have another connection, and that's what I wanted to get into. Red wine girl. What does that mean?
Well, I was always a drinker after I graduated college. When I went to college. I didn't drink in high school because I was terrified of getting kicked out. But once I went to college, I started drinking and absolutely loved it. I was on the women's rugby team, which is like a crash course in problematic drinking behavior.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Bates College in Maine.
Yep. No, well.
Yeah, the women's rugby team. I mean, we were the typical like keg runs, keg stands. The goal was to black out, and I thought it was incredibly fun. And then my drinking kind of transitioned based on my life stages, but once I moved out to Seattle, I lived with my boyfriend, now a fiance. There were lots of, young couples with lots of wine, and started drinking that. And I just was always kind of an every night drinker. Growing up, my parents always had a bottle of wine on the table. I thought that's just what adults did. And, pretty soon a glass turned into a bottle. It wasn't that unusual. I actually didn't have a huge bottom. It was more of a death of a thousand cuts. I almost always drank a bottle of wine a night, sometimes more at the end. Was waking up at 3 a.m. with brutal anxiety, was vaguely hungover every single day, going to work. And just, I knew it was a problem. I knew it was incredibly important to me. When my husband would take a glass of wine for dinner, it would make me mad because I'd be like, all right, now I need to open another bottle of wine, and it's going to be awkward because I'm not going to have enough. And probably worried about my drinking for about a decade before I stopped. I ended up stopping drinking with the help of a sober coach when I was 40 years old. And that was 7.5 years ago.
Wow. And I say wow because that's pretty much my story.
Really?
Yeah. I went to boarding school. I never did drugs. I would drink. The first time I ever drank was when I was, I think, 14, and it was my dad, and he gave me a beer, and we were watching the Celtics versus the Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
And he was giving me, there had been a television, there was sort of a cut in between the commercials, and it was from Nancy Reagan, and she was telling us, don't do drugs, just don't do it, or something like that. And my dad looked at me, and my father was a prosecutor, and he was the chief prosecutor in our state, in the state of Connecticut. And he had told me, and this is a quote, "If you do drugs, I will kill you." And so that was sort of that was my motivation not to do drugs, is preserving my life. But in the same exact conversation, my father gave me a beer at 14 years old and normalized that this isn't a drug. And
Yeah.
that's what I thought all my life, is that alcohol was not a drug, and alcohol was something that we Irish people did to sort of get by the, get over a hard day, or to celebrate a great win. Every social occasion for Irish people seems to revolve around alcohol.
Do you
And
know I'm Irish too? Casey McGuire.
yeah, McGuire. Yeah, I saw that. So and that gets to my point. So I, similar to you, I was terrified of getting thrown out of school. My parents grew up very poor, and I'm not just saying that. They grew up dirt poor, and they instilled in us a sense of gratitude for the fact that we were not poor,
Hmm.
and you were not to look a gift horse in the mouth. And so that I had this chance to go to boarding school from, my dad left government when I was 14. And all of a sudden he went from making $50,000 a year to $200,000 a year. And back in 1987, that was a lot of money.
Yeah, it
And
was.
so I was able to, I read a book called, Goodbye, Mr. Chips. And I wanted to go to boarding school, and my dad sent me. And so the one thing I was never going to do is get kicked out, kind of like you. I said, this is, I'm going to honor my parents' commitment to me. And so I didn't really drink, except for the weekends, when you would be at home. But until I got to college, and even when I got to college, I was at Boston College, and at BC in those years, probably, well, if you're up way up in Maine, it probably wasn't that big of a deal. But in Boston, there was such a crackdown on underage drinking
Hmm.
that it worked, and you couldn't get into a bar. So the only time that you could drink, you ready for this? You're gonna love this, is if you joined the rugby team. And
Oh yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so I was on the rugby team as well.
Oh, you're
Just
kidding, man.
not because I particularly liked rugby. I just liked drinking beer with rugby players.
So you know all the incredibly inappropriate songs that I cringe
Oh,
at every single day of my
cringed
life
at.
when I think of it.
But you probably drank beer out of a boot. You
Hmm.
probably, yes, yes,
Yep.
you did all
Shoot the
those filthy,
boot.
horrible, yeah.
Oh,
So,
disgusting.
so for 2 years, the only place that I really drank was on the weekends at rugby games. So even in college, I was all that bad until BC had a direct exchange program with Ireland. And so you could be a BC student at a Jesuit school in Ireland. They were like brother and sister schools. And when I went to Ireland for the year, that's when everything changed. And I joined the rugby team, and I found out quickly that I really stunk at rugby, because these guys have been playing rugby all their lives, and I've only been playing it to drink beer for 2 years. So when I finally got to Ireland, I tried to join the rugby team, and they informed me, no, we don't need you. You stink. So then I just went and just joined the pub team, and I became a singer in a pub. And that's when I found a lot of comrades in the pub. And it was the first time in my life I started day drinking. And so that is my sort of progression of day drinking. And then I met my first wife in New York when I was an actor, and she introduced me to wine. She was a Argentine, and Argentinian people drink wine every day. They're much like
Mhm.
Italians, and they don't think that it's a problem to drink wine every day. And if you have a problem with it, then something's wrong with you. And so drinking wine every day became a part of our marriage. And for her, that was okay, because she could have that one glass and that wouldn't turn into a bottle. But for
Yeah.
us Irish people, it doesn't work quite like that. And so my one glass would turn into two glasses, and then two glasses would turn into, well, there isn't really three. So it's about two and three quarters, and then that's the end of the bottle. And then you're like, well, I guess I need more. But I used it a lot for sleep, because I was a terrible insomniac. I don't know about you. And so for the longest time, I used drinking wine as an excuse for being able to sleep at night, or else I would be a total insomniac and worried about work and whatnot. So that's the story of us both becoming alcoholics. So I'd like to really get into how you First, I know that you got a sober coach, but what was was there any instance? Was there any? I know that you said that you never really had a real bottom, just a sort of a succession of small little tiny cuts. But was there any moment where there was a moment of clarity when you said, I do have a problem and I need to get some help?
Yes, of course, for sure. And there were probably many moments that should have been that moment of clarity, but
Mm,
weren't. Um, and it was a buildup. So, like many people, the time that I stopped drinking and just have not have not started again and have zero intention of ever drinking again was not my first attempt to stop drinking about 10 and a half years ago. My son was 5, and I was really feeling just like I could not cope with my life. I was working in tech. I had a little kid. My husband and I had just moved to a new neighborhood. I felt really isolated and stressed out. And I was hungover every day. So I would walk into work um, debating, like, do I just abuse alcohol or am I actually an alcoholic? Because if I just abused alcohol, that meant that I could, in my mind, somehow get it under control. I just
yeah,
needed to
yeah,
stop abusing it. And I specifically chose a therapist who specialized in addiction and anxiety. And I went into him and said, my job, my boss, my husband, my kid, I don't sleep. I have crazy anxiety. And by the way, I drink a bottle of wine a night. And he immediately said, let's talk about your drinking. And I was like, no, no, let's talk about my boss.
yeah.
But he was sober. He attended a 12-step program. He very much encouraged me to attend a 12-step program. Right around then, through various books and articles, I found an online secret Facebook group. It was called the Booze Free Brigade. It was a bunch of people who were walking away from alcohol. And I shared there for the first time in a post. I was absolutely terrified and found just 30 women immediately jumped on and said, I'm just like you. My story is just like you. I hear what you're saying. There was a woman there around my age in Seattle who was a lawyer who'd been going to AA for 4 months and was 4 months alcohol free. And she offered to take me. And at the time, it was something I never thought I'd do in my life. I didn't know anyone who was sober. I didn't know anyone who had struggled with alcohol the way I was. I had plenty of friends who were big drinkers, but we didn't really talk about it. And so I went with her with the attitude of like, well, bucket list. This is something I
Yeah.
never thought I'd do. I ended up attending AA for about 4 months. Turns out it was not my jam. It just,
Hmm.
the people there were incredibly nice. It didn't resonate with me. I am in no way religious. I know everyone says it's a spiritual program. I'm not very spiritual. Um, sort of rebelled against the structure and the dogma and the meetings and everything else, which of course meant that then I got pregnant with my daughter. I didn't drink for a year. I decided I was fixed. Um, Lo and behold, I was happier. My life was better. I was better at my job. My marriage was better. And so I thought, oh, it was situational that I drank that much, right? It wasn't that I have a problem with alcohol. It was that my life was stressful and it's no longer that way. And so I decided to moderate, like a lot of people decide to do, right? That's the holy grail that everyone wants. And in no time at all, I was back to drinking every night. In no time at all, I was back to a bottle plus of wine a night, worried about it, knowing it was unsustainable. At that point, I was under no illusions that my anxiety, my 3 a.m. wake ups, my depression was completely and totally related to my drinking. The first time I was sort of oblivious. I didn't realize the correlation, but they always say that recovery ruins you for drinking, and it's completely true. You know too much. Um, but for the longest time, I tried to stop and I couldn't. It was really hard. I would get 4 days, drink a bottle of wine, another 4 days, drink a bottle of wine, which in my mind was way better than 9 days, 9 bottles a week. And it was,
Yeah.
but I was still totally miserable. I was constantly in withdrawal and hungover. And so what happened the second time is, I mean, I was writing myself notes every morning, being like, I can't do this anymore. I went on a nice vacation in Arizona with my family and woke up at 2 a.m. and was throwing up in the bathroom next to my husband and my two little kids. They were 2 and 8, running the sink. So hopefully they didn't hear me. And, on your knees at the age of 38, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is not okay. This is not sophisticated. This is not attractive. I'm hurting myself. I was really afraid that I was going to screw up my marriage and my kids and my health, and it was going to be completely my fault. And so I woke up at 3 a.m. I was on the exact same page, the Facebook page. Someone else was having a day one, and they recommended a sober coach. I contacted her, from my fancy office that morning, and that was my last day one. I emailed her every day for about 2 years, which is crazy. I needed someone to hold my hand step by step by step. What I liked about her was she was very practical and positive, and never used the term alcoholic. It was just about drinking doesn't suit you. This is a health and wellness choice. Nobody needs to drink. And by the way, alcohol is completely addictive, and it is a drug.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was
Did
my
you
path.
did you have any withdrawals when you decided to cease that for that last day one of yours?
No, other than my usual hangovers, which I was completely used to. I felt once I got out of the hangover phase, I felt incredibly tired, just like I'd been hit by a truck. I didn't tell my husband anything more than I was going to stop drinking for 100 days. He totally didn't believe me because I'd said that I was going to stop drinking many, many times.
Yeah.
He didn't know that I had a coach. And that was the first time that I really had support. And the world had changed in those 3 years. I really listened to podcasts every chance I got. I emailed my coach. I had sort of Zoom calls with her. She lived in Paris. And when I was 60 days alcohol free, I joined an online course. It was called Hip Sobriety School, 8-week course with a group and 2 live calls a week, run by Holly Whitaker, who after that wrote the book Quit Like a Woman, which is a hugely popular book, especially among women.
Quit like a woman. I have never heard. I just thought about
Oh,
that. So I'm like, what would be the equivalent of that for men? Quit like a man.
I
I
don't
could have.
know. There are a lot of great books like Alcohol Explained by William Porter. I am hugely into what's now called Quit Lit. And the reason that I like it is, for better or worse, a lot of programs out there, I know there's sobriety for women, but are really geared towards men.
Yeah.
I have so many friends who are in 12-step programs. It was created 80 years ago by two white men, and it is,
Yep.
at least in the big book, very patriarchal. And for women, I believe, and many women believe, that you need a different approach. The issue is typically not our ego. The issue is typically not that we need to be of service. I think for a lot of women, it's that we don't have strong enough boundaries. We give too much of ourselves away. We drink to cope with the way our life has been set up, and it's used as a pacifier to, oh my God, you're trying to do all the things, and there's a lot going on that is hard. Here, have a glass of wine, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you that within the AA model there is certainly a lot of stress that's put on the ego, and there's a lot of stress that's put on pride. And as you know, even in meetings, you hear it all the time where that says there's seven deadly sins and pride leads the parade. And it seems that the reason probably for that is that the founder of it, Bill W., most likely had a pride issue, and therefore he would create the child of himself or the thing that would serve the need in him. So I do understand that, and in that for me in AA has always been a problem because pride and ego was never an issue for me. I was raised by a narcissist and a very bold one. And there was only one ego in my family, and it was not mine. It
Yeah.
was my dad's. And everybody else's ego had to be subservient to his. So my problem is not, pride and having an issue with that the world doesn't know how great I am. My issue is safety and
Yes.
anxiety. So in a lot of ways, I have my wife and I, because my wife doesn't drink, and she stopped drinking 7 years ago when we got together. Um, and that's her story, not mine. I won't tell it. But to live with me and for me to be able to live with somebody, I just said, you can drink if you want to. I never had a problem with. That was a question. Does your husband still drink?
He does.
Yeah, so my wife and I, when we started dating, she drank, and it wasn't until I my wife is from England, and they're very close to Irish people, and my wife's mother's maiden name is Dowd, and her maiden name is Morgan, and these are good drinking stock people, and so there was a point at which I told my wife, "I love you. I really don't like the way that you drink." So like, I could live with you for the rest of my life. It's just we're just gonna have to somebody's gonna have to move out. It's your drinking.
Yeah.
So so my wife and I talk a lot, and um, she always says that she drank a lot because of her anxiety and of her fear. And she says, women are very vulnerable in this world, and going out at night, Ryan, when she tells me going out at night is not the same thing for you as it is for her. And when she says, "Hey, we need Dimetap for the baby at CVS, and it's 8 o'clock and it's pitch dark outside," well, I know what that means. That means you're going to CVS to go get the time attack.
Yeah.
And I should, because there is a difference, and there is a difference between men and women, and we do react, and we do use alcohol and drugs for very different reasons. So that's very interesting. My wife does not go to AA. She does. She has chosen a different pathway. But what she always wants to talk about, and I don't know if you can expand on this, because I don't know too much about it. But what she always talks about is she says, people really ought to do something and say something about the mommy wine culture
Oh God,
in
I've done
America.
so many episodes on both the mommy wine culture as well as alcohol and anxiety and alcohol and sleep, because alcohol really does shoot your nervous system to hell, and
Mm.
spikes your cortisol, and stops you from sleeping well even with a single glass of wine. So I've done a bunch of episodes both on the physiological uh, impacts of alcohol versus what we're taught. But the mommy wine culture is very, very real. When I had my son, I was given books called Sippy Cups Are Not for Chardonnay and Nap Time is the New Happy Hour. Literal books written about this. And of course, I loved this. It is, when you have a child, and you can disagree with me as much as you want, I would say that your world truly changes for women by 80%. And I would say my husband's world changed by about 20%, maybe 30. We went from being completely independent. We both worked, dual income, no kids. We didn't ask each other for permission to do pretty much anything. Of course, we were respectful and, hey, I've got this thing this weekend. Hey, I've got this business trip. But it suddenly went to needing to ask permission to go to the gym, to do whatever, because if I was going to go do something independently, by definition, he would need to take care of our son. And it was humbling, and motherhood is so hard. It's hard on your body. Everybody says it's absolutely wonderful. It's freaking hard. It's not wonderful all the time. It's incredibly emotionally difficult. You are used to being a very successful woman, and suddenly you are giving every moment of your time and energy to a tiny creature who constantly screams at you. And what have you done for me lately? And women only talk about how hard it is when they're drinking together, truly, because otherwise you're supposed to be like, oh my God, this is the best moment of my life. This time's so special. Um, and I didn't particularly have difficult children. So mommy wine culture was a way to reclaim, I'm still an adult. I'm still a badass. You can multitask while drinking. I have to say, playing Legos for the millionth time was a lot more tolerable with a couple glasses of wine. You see your girlfriends, you have wine, you do all the things, cooking dinner, you drink. Once the kids to bed, you drink. It was the one way that you get to relax and have fun. Whereas I used to have a million activities. I was always a big drinker, but I also took guitar lessons and went hiking and went kayaking and, ran 10Ks. I had a lot of other interests. And suddenly I was working till 5:45, rushing out of the office to try to get my son before daycare closed, rushing home, 2 hours with him, getting him to bed, and then jumping back on the computer. And that was on repeat.
How many children do you have?
I have two.
Two.
So they're 6 years apart. So when I quit drinking, my son was 8, my daughter was 2. The first time I quit drinking, my son was 5. I quit for a year, and then I had my daughter. And I'm very, very, very glad I quit drinking when I did. One of the huge motivators for me, because, I was drinking every night. After my son went to bed, I was, falling asleep. I'm saying in quotes, passing out on the couch. My husband couldn't wake me. Hey, your son's jumping on the couch in the morning, and I'm like, oh, mommy doesn't feel so good. Can you stop that? And one of my big motivators was thinking 10 years from now, when he's 18, is he going to want to bring his friends home at 9 p.m.? Are we going to have a close relationship? And I love that I haven't had a drink in 7.5 years, and we are incredibly close. And he's very proud of me for not drinking. When I hit 1,000 days, he and my husband went to a craft store and filled up a huge glass, sort of, I'm not thinking of the right word, a huge glass bowl, and literally counted out 1,000, marbles, and put them in there. And it was on the kitchen table. And that was amazing.
Oh, that is so sweet. That is incredible. I have 5 kids,
No.
and
Wow.
yes, yes. So, and I quit when, let me see, our oldest is at NYU, and she is a drama student at the Tisch School of Drama. And I think she was 4 when I quit. And then the 19-year-old is at Penn State, and I think she was 2, almost 3. I think she just turned 3 when we got divorced. And when I got divorced from my first wife is when I got sober quickly after that. And I had a bottom, unlike you. I didn't have a million cuts. I had a sort of a self-induced bottom. I was sort of, planing going down like normal alcoholism, but uh, a little while later, my first sponsor had always said, he said, "Kid, most people go like this." He said, "You went like that."
Yeah.
And I took a dive off a cliff,
Did
so
that
to speak.
contribute to your divorce?
My divorce contributed to my diving off the cliff.
Okay, fair enough.
I did a lot of things that many alcoholics do when I was actively drinking. I traveled a lot. That had a lot to do with my over dependence on or abuse of alcohol,
Yeah.
and I had a lot of I was traveling a lot worldwide and internationally, and so I was going to China a lot. I was going to Europe, particularly a lot, and a lot of that was screwing up my sleep schedule. So when I tell you I was an insomniac, I really actually was.
Yeah.
And the only way that I could just lay down for 4 or 5 hours and get some sleep is if I drank 3 glasses of wine. That never really became an issue until uh, my 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 first wife started having children. Because, like I said, she was my wine buddy and my fellow wino, and I she never saw, I guess, how much I was drinking until she stopped, and that's when I became like a real alcoholic. I started, using vodka because I remember, I'll never forget it. It was our first child was I think she was probably about 7 months pregnant. And I had come home I was in Milan for about a week, and I came home and I opened up a really nice bottle of wine that I brought from Milan, and I said, "Here, you can have a glass of it." And I think she was 7 months pregnant, so the doctor told her she could have a little bit. So she had a little bit, and that was fine. And she came down the next morning, and I came down, and she picked up the bottle out of the garbage, and she said, "I probably had 2 ounces of this. You
Yeah.
drank the whole thing?" And I went, "Yeah, absolutely." And you haven't noticed, but that's how I drink, and I've been drinking like that for quite a long time. But that night, so I went to work that day. I came back, and as I was coming back, I did what I normally did, and I stopped off at the package store, and I saw Ray at the package store. He was my buddy, and I bought a bottle of wine. And then I saw over in the corner that they had these little nippy things, and I'm like, "I guess I might as well just have a couple of those." And so I grabbed them, and I was so embarrassed buying them because I swear my brain, my soul, something knew that this was wrong. Something knew that this was a problem, and I needed help, and I needed to stop. But the alcoholism took over, and it said, "Don't listen to that guy. I know what I'm talking about. I know how to handle this." And that guy told me to buy one little nip. And so that night I went home and I poured a glass of wine for myself and I had that. And then when she wasn't looking, I drank my little nip. And now I had 2 drinks in me, which still wasn't enough. So then I had
Yeah.
another glass. Well, that quickly turned from 1 nip to 3 nips. And then from 3 nips is very easy to go to a half a pint because you're actually saving money that way. And from the half a pint, you're obviously going to graduate to a pint of this stuff. And so my bottom, I guess, blessedly, it wasn't that far down because I was probably consuming a half a bottle of vodka just after work. So I would leave work at 6 o'clock. I would drop, and I had an hour and a half commute home at night.
Yeah.
And I would stop at a package store close to whereby I was and get vodka and a Sprite and drive 60 miles. And I can tell you, for a former prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, doing that kind of stuff is about as low as you should go.
Yeah.
Uh,
I thought
and
you were on a
there,
train.
yeah, no,
I've
I
heard
was
that
not
a
on any
lot.
train. Nope, I was not on any train. And when you're driving on the highway, and you probably see this many times, you'd be driving on the highway, you just see plastic bottle, plastic bottle, plastic bottle. You see them everywhere. And there's just bottle of booze littering the highway. And those are people just throwing the bottle out the window before they get home and
Yeah.
hiding the evidence. So that was my particular journey. Um, but in moving on from bottoms and moving now on to recovery, in your recovery coaching, what kind of techniques and modalities do you teach people
Mhm.
to get their mind detached from the constant focus, the glare that we have when it comes to alcohol, and to try to open their eyes to see, the full um, the full
Yeah.
beauty of life, and to take advantage of it.
Well, I think it helps to understand who I work with. So I typically work with high achieving women who um are like me, most working moms, most drinking whatever their drink of choice equivalent is, a bottle plus of wine a night, typically have not had, external issues. They still have their marriage, their job, their kids, no legal issues, and yet they know it's a problem. Typically have not talked with anyone in their lives about it. This is something that everybody knows they drink, and they desperately don't want anyone to know they have a problem with it. Their spouse, their friends are drinkers, and they have tried to moderate, right? They've tried
Okay.
every single way to limit their alcohol. I mean, I did. I'm going to sign up for a 10K to run at night so I won't drink at night. I'm going to do 5:30 a.m. boot camp so I won't drink as much the night before. I'm going to switch to white wine or beer because I like red wine better. I mean, nothing worked.
Right.
Um, at least not for very long. And so on my podcast, I talk about this a lot. And so I think you attract the people who resonate with your story. So, like I said, I'm not a member of a 12-step program. I am a certified life and sobriety coach. I take a habit and behavior change approach to stopping drinking, with top of mind constantly that alcohol is addictive. If you need to consume more, if you think that you are not as happy when you're not drinking, that you're more irritated and less patient and not as relaxed, that is the substance working as designed. You're actually in withdrawal. And so the way I approach women is first get them away from the alcohol, meaning you cannot see clearly the way it is influencing every single aspect of your life, your relationships, your job, your nervous system, your sort of overall level of contentment and happiness
Hmm.
until you get some distance from it. So even though, like me, I could barely get 4 days without drinking, when women sign up with me, I say, okay, our joint goal is to get you to 100 continuous days alcohol free. And that's for a whole bunch of reasons. Um, Including the typical ups and downs I've seen women go through within those first 100 days, right? It's not all pink clouds. At various times it's pretty difficult. They're going to have to in that time go through a birthday, an anniversary, a vacation. For the first time, they're going to have to figure out how to function without alcohol in work stress, in parenting, in marriage issues, how to go on dates without alcohol, how to have sex without alcohol. I mean, all the things, business trips. But they're going to have me to hold their hand through every step of the way. So it's a very practical approach with accountability, but obviously not every single one of my clients does it perfectly. So if they do drink, it's a learning opportunity that they didn't have enough support. But I am very clearly not a moderation coach. So I walk them through, all right, first week, you are going to be irritated, craving, tired. You need to tell people in your life you're not drinking. You don't have to tell them more than that. You need to try to get all the alcohol out of your house, or at the very least, your beverage of choice. You need to lower the bar and do the bare minimum. You need to, reach out to me. I'm in your back pocket. I want to hear from you. If you know, all the things. And then we build up from that, right? Then we're like, all right, you're going out to dinner. Text me before, text me during. I don't care. What are you going to order? Look at the menu. Don't go in hungry. Um, it's very practical. And obviously, I'm a sobriety coach. My goal is not to get them to 100 days and be like, all right, drink again. My goal is to do the work between day one and day 100 so that when they get to 100 days, they can't believe how little they were settling for on day one. They feel better and they're excited about what's next. So they move the goalposts. For me, I found with women and with myself, the idea of never drinking again is a bridge too far in the beginning. You won't get past the first week, meaning you will look at someone having a glass of wine in a restaurant and just feel such sadness and such longing and think that I will never have that again. And say, okay, I'm going to drink one more time. And then that just repeats. So I want them to think of it like a health kick to lower the drama and fear and meaning behind it, to be like, okay, you know, you're doing 100 days. It's like running a marathon. It's something to be proud of. It's an experiment. You're going to look better. You're going to feel better. Pretend you're a vegetarian. This is a health and wellness choice. It does not need to define your life. And you don't need to accept a label for it. But I'm trying to do early intervention, right? Before they need to go through physical withdrawal, before they go through
Yeah.
rehab. And I think that what I love is the sober curious movement, where people are openly talking about alcohol and the fact it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Have you ever looked into any of the reports from the Scripps Institute about the genetic component of alcoholism? And because the soberish movement and sort of interdicting the alcoholism early.
Mhm.
Whenever I think about that, and it's just these are me statements, because when I hear that, it makes it, and when I hear your story and what you can do for people, does it make me feel guilty? I guess it kind of does, because
Yeah.
I wonder if I had spoken to somebody like you, whether or not I could have saved a lot of people a lot of pain.
Oh,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? And so, because I knew that I was an alcoholic when I was 26 years old, and I knew that I drank to a level that, um, I drank an amount that was alarming at 25, 26 years old. And I also knew that at 7 o'clock every morning. So I know that you had said that, you had a lot of first days until you had that last first day. I probably had I had thousands of them.
Yeah.
And it was every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I would wake up with a hangover. And that was just normal for me. And I would go out drinking with a guy. We go out and play golf, and we'd have, your typical 12 units of alcohol, pretty much. And he would be hungover in the next day. Oh my God, my freaking head. And I'd be up at 7 making coffee and ready to go out and go skiing, or, ready to go out and go water skiing. And I remember my friends would look at me and they'd say, "Man, you're just tougher than we are." And I had like a sense of pride about it. Um, and for me, when I would pick up that first drink, if I just picked up that first one, that was it. There was no stopping me. Most people, when they have a drink, as you probably know, they'll have just one drink and they'll feel sedated, they'll feel serene, they'll feel um, calm. It's sort of the lack of anxiety. So it's not really happiness; it's just not pressure, and it
Yeah.
isn't. it isn't really like a dopamine party. It's just sort of the lack of all the cortisol that's filling around in your head all day long. Um, so I would go from one drink to I could have about four would be the minimum that I would have, three or four, and then the most I would have would be about eight, something like that. And I never did any stimulants. So by about 11 o'clock, I would pass out, which is exactly what I was trying to do, is fall asleep. So I wasn't one of those normal people that were those typical people that go out to the bar and they stay out for 3 days and they go on these
Yeah.
runs and all these amazing stories that you hear in rehab and whatnot. But and that's how when people ask me, they say, "Where did you become an alcoholic?" And I said, "I became an alcoholic at home."
Yeah.
And
Well,
and and
it's
it
funny
is
you're
odd.
saying that. My story is exactly like yours. I mean, literally every single thing you described, from the emotions to the drinking to the, I mean, I drank a bottle of wine a night, right? Which is 5 glasses essentially, or one or two more. I used to wake up in the morning and hold up the second bottle, with one eye open, while getting my coffee to sort of judge how bad my day was going to be, right? If there was like 3/4 left, I was like, all right, it's going to be okay. If there was 1/4 left, I was like, damn, this is going to be a bad one.
You gotta throw the bottle. You gotta finish the bottle and throw it away, Casey. What's the matter with
Well, you got to finish the first bottle, but if you open the second one, that's where you're like, boy. And I'd be opening bottle number two, not all the time, but not. It wasn't a one time a month occurrence. And my husband would look at me, and this is a Tuesday night, and just be like, "What are you doing?"
what's
And
the
I'd just
matter?
be like, "You know what? It's been a hard day. I just need
Yeah,
one more."
yeah,
And I'd be like, God, why is he so judgy? So, in terms of hiding stuff, how you can just your thinking gets crazy where you were thinking of creative solutions. I would sometimes have two bottles of wine going, one that had a screw top in the wine rack, one that had a cork that I would drink when my husband would go do something else. I would open, I'd been on the couch all night. I would lickety split, hop off the couch, run to fill up my glass, with the other
yeah.
bottle, jump back on. I hadn't moved in hours, and so the behavior and I think the amount is the same. I just, my husband almost never said anything to me. You know what I mean? And we've been together since we were 22 or 23. It was just part of our relationship. He very much felt like he was not my parent. And he said, I interviewed him on my podcast. I was terrified to talk to him because we never really I didn't want to know what he remembered, or thought of me at the time. Turns out he was much more kind to me than I was to myself. Um, I was sort of the smiley drunk who just kind of passed out on the couch and was very loving 95% of the time, and still overcompensated to keep absolute, I would set the coffee and do the dishes and
Yeah,
set 6 alarms before I ever had glass number 4,
yeah.
but he never told me to stop drinking. In fact, the week I stopped, he said to me, "Hey, why don't you just join the wine club of your favorite winery so you don't go out a couple times a week for a couple of bottles of wine?" And in my mind, I'm like, "Listen to what you are saying."
Yeah.
I was just like, "How can you not think this is a problem?" But at the same time, I never shared with him how worried I was about my drinking, how terrible I felt in the morning, how important it was to me, because I desperately didn't want him to know. So it was just, how could he understand? You know?
Oh, yeah. I know. I know. I know the sort of disconnect that alcoholics and non-alcoholics have, and that people who can drink normally, and then they have one or two drinks, and then they just say, you know what, if I have another one, I'm going to feel sick.
I'm like, that's
Those are
adorable.
normal people. And
Yeah.
then, alcohol is a depressant, and to normal people, it's a depressant. And then there are some people who have that C allele on the GABA2 gene, and what the MAC study, the Oxford Institute study, had concluded years ago was that what it looked like is that the people who have this C allele, who are sort of these genetic alcoholics, I guess you could have what it is, the reason why they drink in excess isn't that they have a particular uh, uh, a more a dynamic response to alcohol. It's the opposite. The reason that they drink so much is that the euphoric feelings of alcohol don't come for people with that C allele as quickly as they do with people who have what's called an L allele
Hmm.
on that GABA2 gene. So essentially, the alcoholics have to drink 3 times as much to get that same feeling of calmness and serenity as a sort of typical person, which would probably explain the binginess. But what it really was for me, it was an old timer in an AA meeting one time, and he said, most people when they have a drink, they get that I want to sit down feeling. He goes, when I would have a drink, I got that get up and go kind of feeling, like I wanted to dance on top of a table with every woman in the bar. And I go, oh man, does that explain exactly the way I felt when I drank? And that explains the over or the abuse of the alcoholism until it gets to a certain point. Do you think that you ever got to? Well, I guess you probably answered that already. Um, what would you suggest for people who that are more physically addicted? Do you think that they could benefit from your program, or that they would need an inpatient program?
I do believe they need an inpatient program or a medical detox or an outpatient program. I mean, the way I coach women is, do it via Zoom. I work with women in Canada, in the US. I've had clients in Mexico and Italy. Um, but it is I am not there with them. I cannot remove the alcohol from their house. I am not there to stop them from drinking, right? So there, and also, as you know, medical detox, physically withdrawing can be incredibly dangerous. I mean, it
It's
can
deadly. It's
kill you.
deadly. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
deadly. So I definitely have had a couple clients who I've said to them, I think you need more support than a coach can provide. I know it's a spectrum, right? They don't necessarily medically use the term alcoholism anymore. It's alcohol use disorder,
Yeah.
mild, moderate, and severe. I probably deal with women on the moderate to heavy moderate side. I think there is a point where you absolutely need situational change. You need the alcohol out of the possibility of being around you. The one thing I would say from what you were mentioning before is what I believe in sort of the doctors I've talked to is there is absolutely a hereditary family dynamic. There also can easily not be that.
Mm.
No one in my family ever abused alcohol. My parents had a glass a night. My sister has no issues. I believe there are underlying factors that make alcohol work really well for some people, whether it's social anxiety, whether it's ADHD. ADHD,
Yeah.
people with that have a 5 times more likely are 5 times more likely
That's me.
to suffer with addiction due to the lack of dopamine right in
Uh,
their system. And whether it any kind of underlying depression, anxiety, other factors can make alcohol really attractive, as well as environment, right? If I truly believe that if you drink enough, often enough, you will become addicted the same way you will to
Yep.
smoking. That's how it's designed to work. And, playing rugby, that was, in no way do I blame them, but that was a crash course in drinking to blackout, that being celebrated, surrounded by huge drinkers. And once I was a big drinker, I didn't want to hang out with anyone who wasn't. Um, and it just escalates from there, right? You start with a drink a night, and suddenly it's three, and suddenly it's a bottle, and suddenly you're rationalizing it, and suddenly when you're not drinking you're less happy and you want more. And my husband used to be like, you just don't have an off switch, you drink until the alcohol is gone or you pass out. And I was like, yep, true story. Yeah.
That certainly sounds like we could have hung out together back in the
Oh,
days on
wow.
the rugby pitch.
I actually love ex drinkers, they're my favorite because
Yeah.
they have great stories. um,
We
they
do. I often tell people, I'm like, if you didn't have fun getting here, then you got gypped, because it was a lot of fun,
yeah, it was.
until it wasn't.
Yes. Yeah.
I do like to say that, and when it isn't fun anymore, generally is when you have children, pretty much. That's like, because even in the first 3 years of my first marriage, we didn't have any children yet, and it was just honeymoon the whole time. The whole time was one big honeymoon, and there wasn't any sort of responsibility until there was. I'm sorry, I have a puppy jumping on me.
Oh,
All
it's
right, you got to get
okay.
down. Oh, he's our little 1 year old golden retriever, and then we have an 11-year-old. They won't leave me be. But I did relate to that part of what you were saying, with the when the alcoholism sets in, because and I like to tell this to people. You could be because people get hooked up with the genetics of it, and they say,
Mhm.
well, am I a genetic alcoholic? And then well, I don't know. Just look anecdotally. I mean, for me, two grandfathers, alcoholics, a grandmother who was an alcoholic, a mother who was an alcoholic, a father who abused alcohol, an aunt who abused alcohol. I mean, it's just, we're replete with everybody. It's just ubiquitous in our family. And I like to tell people, I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell's book, and I don't
Mhm.
know if you could relate to
Yeah,
this,
the
where
tipping point, right?
well, it's more like, yeah, the tipping point, or it's that 10,000 hour rule that he had, where he
Mhm.
says to become a professional in anything, you have to put
Oh,
ten
yeah.
thousand hours into it. It's kind of like alcohol. Now, I don't know if it's 10,000 drinks. It's probably more than that. But at some point, your hypothalamus stops functioning properly,
Mhm. I mean, it does
and
alter your brain.
and your mammalian
Absolutely.
brain just stops operating in a normal fashion. And it's at that point that I tell people that, as a medical definition, that's where they would say that you're an alcoholic, is that when you're
Mhm.
having withdrawal substance and you don't, and all of a sudden one night you decide that you're not going to drink. And then what would happen to me is I would go into, number one, insomnia. Number two, my blood pressure would get to about 220 over 110.
Mhm.
And then I would start getting the sweats,
Yeah.
and that's when I started getting scared, because I did a little reading up on it, and they told me how close at that point you are to having a grand mal seizure. And at that point is when I really got scared. But as I sit here today, that did not stop me from drinking.
Yeah.
The
Because
the the
you're really far down at that
I
point.
wasn't afraid to die. A matter of fact, that's probably subconsciously what I was trying to do, anyways.
Mhm.
As I was drinking myself at the very end, to the point where I would be, drunk, sleep, wake up, hungover, get drunk, sleep. All I wanted to do was sleep. And when people would come over and they'd say, "Hey, Rye, you got to get up, you got to get out of this funk," and I just say, "Man, all I want to do is sleep. All I want to do is sleep." And what I was saying, and if anybody's watching, uh, these signs out of an alcoholic are very bad. That an alcoholic in that state is in a dangerous position, because of what I was really saying is I want to sleep forever. I
Yeah.
don't want to wake up anymore. I don't want to live with the pain I've caused to myself and to others. And I couldn't get an honest perspective, even on myself, because just like you, I felt so bad about what I was doing. And that you had your husband on your podcast, you probably thought he's really gonna just really beat on me because
Yeah.
again, you didn't have a true perspective when we were drinking of what we were really like. And a lot of people exaggerate and they say, well, it's a lot worse than it really was, or it's not as bad as it really was. But no matter if we're exaggerating or we're minimizing, we're not telling the truth of what happened because we were drunk and we don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
but but as you so as you sit here today and 7 years sober, what can you tell people who might be watching and they might have a loved one that they would like to show this to? What can you share with them? Are the wonderful things that have happened in your life that you don't think would have been possible if you were still drinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest change is just my level of calm and my level of happiness and the lack of waking up hating myself. The lack of quitting on myself is amazing. My life actually didn't change when I stopped drinking for 3 years. Um, After 3 years, I went back to coaching school. I decided to become a life and sobriety coach. I finally left my corporate job 4 years later, but I was a director at a Fortune 500 company, same husband, same kids, same friends. I didn't change
Hmm.
my friends. I added a lot of friends who didn't drink as well. I was additive to it. But once I stopped drinking, once I got out of the early bits and did a bunch of mindset work, I was just amazed how much easier my life was, how much more confident my life was. My job was easier. My marriage was better. Parenting was easier. And, things that I always said I was going to do and never did, I suddenly was able to follow through on. And I look back and can't believe how little I settled for when I was drinking, where having opening the bottle of wine at 6 p.m. was my highlight of my day. And I would walk into work thinking I hate my life. I was 2 months sober, and I remember vividly walking into work at 8 a.m., seeing, it was foggy, it was misty, the birds were flying up, and I was just like, oh my God, I love my life. That level of sort of technicolor, tender, transformative moment you get. And I couldn't believe it, that level of like joy and wonder. Um, but I feel like you have to get away from alcohol to feel that and to see that clearly. I truly believe that we have been completely and totally brainwashed to believe that alcohol helps us relax, helps our anxiety, is a
Mm.
privilege of adulthood, is required. And I think that's changing. I mean, 70% of Americans don't realize that alcohol causes cancer. Um, Almost all women. I don't know, for until 2020, the American Cancer Society, the recommended amount to drink was 1 drink a day for women, 2 for men. It was actually recommended, which is insane. They have now said no level of alcohol is
Yeah,
healthy.
zero,
Zero.
zero.
And it causes 7 kinds of cancer. But not only that, 3 drinks a week, 3 a week for women raises your risk of breast cancer by 15%. And every drink over that, another 10%. And so within what the American Cancer Society was recommending would have raised your risk of breast cancer by 50%.
Um, yeah, and whenever I see those new studies that refute the old studies, what I always want to know is why aren't we calling out the authors of the old studies and
Yeah,
asking them
they were funded, literally
what
funded.
influenced this and who funded this? That's what
Yeah.
I would like to know.
Yeah, and
There's a lot of that nonsense going on with with pharmaceutical companies and
yeah,
fudge numbers and whatnot about all kinds of things. And whenever people say, "Well, you don't need to see the data because it's too complicated for you," I immediately go, "I'm being lied to."
Yeah.
So yeah, I always wondered about those because there was that 2 glass of wine a night is good for your heart nonsense.
Crap.
It is really what got my family on the wine culture.
Hmm.
And we were, beer and a scotch kind of family. That's what my dad was, and my mom. My mom would drink a little bit of scotch because she didn't like beer, but my dad was a Pabst Blue Ribbon guy when I was young. And my parents, again, we didn't have a lot of money till I was a teenager. And it wasn't until I was a teenager that my parents started drinking on a daily basis. And so
Yeah.
they didn't hit that sort of 10,000 drinks limit or whatever it is until much later in life. So, do you have a lot of experience with late onset addiction, especially in women?
No, no. And I'm very clear about the women I coach. Like if someone I talk to them about what they drink, how much they drink, what their history is, what their life is, and if I'm not the right fit for them or I don't feel like I have the expertise to help them, I refer them to other people. I also don't work with women who have a history of eating disorders. That's not something I've dealt with or I'm an expert in. I don't work with women who are in emotionally abusive relationships or toxic relationships. I really feel like you need to find a coach or a doctor or a therapist who is equipped to help you.
Yeah, especially with those coexisting conditions because they're very dangerous and they need to be dealt with a lot with my interventions. If you have somebody with a coexisting mental health issue, I usually tell people I'm not the guy for you to do
Yeah.
this, and you need a medical professional. And this is not a medical. This is I'm not a medical professional, and I
Yeah.
certainly am not holding myself out to be one. Um, it has been wonderful speaking with you. I
It's been
don't mean to
great.
cut us short. I do have to get to Penn State because it is Parents' Weekend, and I have been. This is you're gonna love this one. I have been invited to a sorority party tonight.
So fun.
I've never been to a sorority party in my entire life. The Jesuits, we don't allow sororities or fraternities in Jesuit universities because they're pagans, and we don't believe in that stuff. So we never had that at BC, which is why at BC the best parties were the rugby parties because we
Yeah.
were the only like kinda fraternity that there really was. But it was a sorority too, because as you know, there's a lot of girls that play rugby and go to the drinking parties and drink out of dirty boots. Yeah. But it has been wonderful speaking with you, and I really would like to connect with you again in the near future. And thank you for being on the program, and I wish you the best of luck.
You as well. It's so nice to meet you and speak to you, and thank you.
And when I see our mutual friends on Facebook, I will give a shout out from you for all your
Sounds
choke people.
good.
Take care, Casey.
Okay.